data protection, as well as digitize by crafting principle-led guardrails that are embedded in law, which is exactly what we've done. We have a data protection law. We've created the guardrails that are required to protect an individual's right to privacy, individual's right to own his or her data, as well as accelerate and deeply embed technology in government and governance. So I think people who say that somehow digital ID automatically implies a violation of personal information privacy have not read the last two chapters of the book that they've been reading.
An infringement of civil liberties as well?
Look, this is an interesting debate to have, but I think if you're open to a conversation, the Indian example will show you that we are able to, for example, in India, data protection and privacy is a fundamental right. It's a constitutional right. So it's not just something that is legislated, it is a constitutional right. And we have had a data protection law passed by Parliament that effectively manages to protect that fundamental right, the fundamental right of the citizen, as well as continue to expand the innovation, continue to expand the digitization of our economy. So I submit that this is not a contradiction, this is not a binary, and if you go down and dig a little deep into this, you can figure out solutions that can do both, protect the individual's rights to information privacy, as well as grow an innovation ecosystem, a digitized, reimagined state that can deliver better, be more responsive, and be more efficient.
And how difficult was the job of achieving digital literacy? I mean, I would imagine among certain sections of the population, elderly population who are unwilling to think, oh, I can't.
How difficult was the job?
Yeah, so I'm not the biggest fan of big tech.
I would
but one of the things that the big tech has done for all democracies and especially open is that they have managed to convince the WhatsApp, they have managed to help in the digital literacy process. So there is already an organic process where people are learning, engaging, embracing tech, led by these big tech platforms. We ran a very large program to cover rural India, especially women, to make sure that they were embracing tech, they were being educated on digital literacy, and they were downloading these apps and using these apps and connecting to the government in a manner that they should. And today we have, over the last 10 years, built 55 million homes, of which 80% free homes for poor people, and of which 80% of those homes are owned directly by women. So there are many adjacent benefits to digitalization, which is empowerment, for example. When you talk empowerment, not in the abstract, real empowerment, real wealth creation, real asset creation for real people.
Were there other political difficulties in delivering this that maybe you hadn't anticipated?
Look, I think in democracies, and especially ones like in India, I think every good intention has pushback. And what we did is, for example, every step of the way on our digital identity program and our data protection laws, we conducted extensive, deep public consultations. We took the people along with it. So I think to say that there is no opposition to any good idea, despite it being a good idea, is wrong in India, and it's certainly, I think, the case in the UK and other parts of the world as well.
Yeah, and we heard from Tony a moment ago setting out the case of how transformative AI could be. India has started on this journey. Do you think AI accelerates it?
Look, I was listening to the two young ladies at the beginning, at the top of the show, Evie and Sasha, and I think they said two things, and they are absolutely true as far as AI is concerned. And one is that AI is the kinetic enabler of our economies. It's a fact. Anybody who lives in denial of it is doomed to fail. It is the next big thing. There's a book by Mustafa Suleyman from DeepMind titled The Coming Wave. And it is certainly that. It is the coming wave. It's going to be big. It is going to be transformational. It is going to require a lot of people to do a lot of adjustment. And at the same time, AI is also, as Mr. Blair said, clearly the power to do more with less. You will be able to do a lot more as a government with AI with less resources that any government could do in the past. These two attributes of AI, and there's, everybody is an expert in AI and everybody has many views on AI, but I like to focus on these two things about AI that cannot be ignored, must be embraced, and you have to figure out your own steady state as a government or as a people or as a business or as a community on which of those two parts or both those that you want to embrace and adapt to.
And for countries lower down the income scale, does this technology offer a kind of, an opportunity for economic growth that maybe wasn't there before?
Oh, I think so. I think, again, somebody mentioned that in the video there, and I repeat that. I think technology is the biggest leveler in the recent years of the disparity between the North and the South. The global South and the haves and the have-nots. The gap between these two blocks of countries, if you want to call it that, is being leveled and equalized by technology in a manner that we haven't seen happen for decades in the world. And today, I was at the AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park a few months ago, and it is clear that even the smallest of countries, whether they are in Africa, whether they are in South America or in Asia, they all aspire to the power of tech and the power of AI, not just to improve governance, but to improve governance, create their own innovation ecosystem, create startups, be a participant in certainly shaping the future of the world as we all see it. I think so. For the first time, regardless of the size of the country, you are potentially a player if you have the political leadership to do that in shaping the future of the economy and future of tech.
And is India working with other countries in
Yes.
the India stack?
Yeah, so we've taken our India stack, the India DPI, and offered it to the rest of the world, especially the smaller countries. Because for us, as a government, we think digital exclusion should be the first victim, if you want to call it that, of this new phase of technology growth. We certainly want every country in the world, small, big, emerging, not so emerging, developed, to all to have access to the best technologies, open source technologies that we are building and any other country is building.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I suspect this is changing some of the sort of geopolitics, around technology, with India playing an ever more prominent role.
Yeah, I think, again, there are many people here who follow technology for many years. If you look back at the 10 years or beyond, you'll see that tech was almost certainly a small cabal of countries, if you want to call it that sort of controlled tech. There were proprietary technologies, boxes that nobody really could penetrate, and they were the givers of tech. And most of the world were consumers of tech. And I think that is changing. A number of trends, AI, open source technologies, the fact that softwareization of platforms is increasing and you don't really need proprietary hardware as much. All of this is leading to a realization, despite some northern neighbors of mine wanting to control tech and the future of tech, that there is a huge opportunity for the democracies of the world to play this leadership role in shaping the future of tech. I mean, India, of course, we think we will play a role, but it is not our case that we want to replace the US or we want to replace China. I think our case is that we think India, UK, US, and many other democratic countries of the world can work in a good, trusted partnership to create the technologies of the future.
It's so funny, the history of this country is about, Britain led the Industrial Revolution around the world, and you kind of look at the technological revolution that is unfolding before our eyes, and you kind of look to India now as one of the leading countries. So what should Britain be doing? What should Britain be doing in terms of spending, in terms of R&D, and all the rest of it, so that it is also a major player?
Okay, again, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I mean, my personal view on this is that I think UK has, and I say this at the risk of offending people, but has slipped on the overall innovation ladder. And I'm not using any metric or any report to, it's just my gut feel that you are being left behind. And I was at the Bletchley Park AI Safety Summit, and it was quite clear that there are countries that were, in a sense, banking on the weakness of some of the leading nations of the world in this area to take the leadership. And I won't mention names of those countries, but you are aware of those countries. I think it's important that in this, for the next decade, this coming wave of tech, AI, UK, and especially democracies like the UK have to step up and play a leading role. I mean, I know the past was about geopolitics and we talked about security and all of that. I think as we look to the future of global trade, global digital protocols and agreements, it will be any country who is not relevant in that conversation is a country that is going to find themselves broadly relevant in terms of talking about the future economies.
Rajiv, that was absolutely fascinating, and I think the final point you made there will have been appreciated by this audience. Rajiv Chatterjee, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely riveting. Now, our next speaker, Matt Clifford, is the co-founder and chair of Entrepreneur First, investing $10 billion in startups. He's also the chair of the UK's Advanced Research and Innovation Agency, ARIA, good acronym, which focuses on projects with the potential to produce transformative technological change. He's here to tell us how AI is going to shape the future and how Britain can play an outsized role in this technology revolution. Matt, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Matt Clifford, and as you've just heard, I've spent the last decade trying to answer one very big question. How can we make the UK the best place in the world to build, scale, and adopt AI? And what I want to try and spend the next 15 minutes doing is persuading you of three things. The first is that answering that question is perhaps the most urgent and important task that we face as a country. The second is that the UK actually does have the foundations to answer that question positively. We can do this and we can win. But the third is that doing so will require a relentless focus on execution and an extraordinary level of ambition. I've been fortunate to spend my career on the front lines of AI, both in the private and in the public sector. Through my company, Entrepreneur First, I've helped to incubate some of the UK's biggest AI success stories, companies like Tractable, Clio, Magic Pony Technology. And in the public sector, I've been lucky to play some role in building the UK's state capacity to where it is today, partly as the chair of the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, ARIA, which you've heard about, but also as part of the team that last year helped to set up the UK AI Safety Institute, and as one of the co-Sherpas for the AI Safety Summit, which you also just heard about, which we held at Bletchley Park last year. What I've taken from these experiences is that you've already heard from Tony and others, AI is the transformational technology of our time. And if we get it right, it will unlock extraordinary benefits for the UK and its people and for the world. We all know that the UK has been through a decade of economic stagnation. I believe that AI is one of the best levers we have to reverse that and to usher in a new period of growth. It also has the opportunity to transform public services. Imagine a world where your elderly relative's AI NHS assistant pre-identifies that the risk of her falling and suffering a debilitating injury has increased. And behind the scenes, that AI assistant coordinates with other NHS AI assistants at the GP, at the hospital, in social care, to pre-plan your relative's care and intervene early. Imagine a world where a startup owner is able to pre-apply for R&D tax credits using information that the AI assistant already has. In fact, the AI assistant is able to identify the full range of financing options available. Also, and I think this is an underrated one, AI has the opportunity to massively amplify the UK's place in the world. The next decade is going to see unprecedented adoption of AI all across the world. And the question that needs to be answered is, what flavor of AI and whose values will that embody? That is up for grabs, and the UK is one of a handful of countries well placed to be the answer, to be one of the world's AI superpowers. But to understand the magnitude of both the opportunity but also the task ahead, it's worth taking a brief step back in time. In many ways, ChatGPT's release in November of 2022 was the moment that AI rocketed up the agenda for policymakers and politicians. But it's very important, I think, to see the ChatGPT moment as the culmination of a decade-long trend, not as a snapshot moment in time. My introduction to AI was back in 2012. An entrepreneur came into my office with a printout of a rather dry-looking academic paper, this one, but he was breathless with excitement. He said, "This is going to change everything." And he was right. Fortunately, I believed him. We funded him at Entrepreneur First, and he went on to build one of the UK's AI unicorns, Tractable. But the reason I'm showing you this paper, and don't worry, we're not going to go through the abstract in great detail, is that in many ways, this paper ignited the revolution that we saw over the last decade. It's often called AlexNet, this paper, named after Alex in the top left-hand corner. And this paper was a breakthrough in image recognition tasks, which has been a long-standing challenge in AI. What AlexNet did was not just beat existing benchmarks by a little, it was the AI equivalent of someone turning up at the Olympics and running the 100 meters in 7 seconds. But what mattered more was not just what they did, but how they did it. The how is what would spark the enormous investment that we've seen over the last 12 years. So what was the how? Well, two things. First, the architecture they used, deep neural networks. This was an old idea, but we finally had the ability to make them viable. And what you'll see is that all the AI tools that we use today kind of use this type of architecture. But the really important thing is, why had they suddenly become viable despite being an old idea? Well, really because of what we today call compute, or computational power. And this is the main reason I'm giving this history lesson, because what sparked this revolution is also what we're going to need to think about as we look forward. This paper was possible because we were able to use a previously obscure kind of semiconductor chip called the GPU, made by a tiny obscure company called NVIDIA, which you might have seen on Tony's chart earlier as a $3 trillion company today. If you'd invested in NVIDIA at the time, then you probably would be on an island rather than sitting here today. Now, what's exciting about this is that it unlocked a decade of breakthroughs. Many of them here in London, thanks to the genius of Demis Hassabis, who you're about to hear from, and his team at DeepMind. Using these architectures and using this huge amount of compute, you had the ability to win computer games from scratch, one of the famous DeepMind demos. Then most famously of all, you could beat the world's best Go players using a deep learning model, a task that at the time people thought was decades away. And then in 2017, also out of Google, this novel architecture called the Transformer. Now again, I'm not going to go into detail, but why am I telling you this? Because the exciting thing about the Transformer is that they have the ability to absorb almost unlimited amounts of compute and of data. And when I say almost unlimited amounts, I really do think we've put this to the test. The present of AI is all about scale. And this is going to be crucial as we think about what it will take for Britain to win. This chart behind me rather, shows the progress of the amount of compute we've invested in these models over time. On the bottom, you have the progress of time, and up the side, you have how much computational power was used to power these models. Now, this is a log chart, which we sadly all got used to during COVID. Every time you move up one rung, that's a 10-fold increase in compute. So when I said the exciting thing about AlexNet in 2012 was how much compute it used, this is AlexNet here. Demis's latest models, up here, use 100 million times at least more computational power, 100 million times in a decade. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say there has never been a technology in the history of the world that's seen a 100 million-fold increase in investment in a 10-year period. That is the scale of what we're looking at here. But scale isn't just about spending more. Scale has real-world impact. Now, I've chosen a relatively amusing example here, which is the progress in image generation. This is clips from Midjourney, which many of you may have used. This is just in 2 years the impact of scale. The same prompt written in, look at the quality improvement in images, simply from scaling up the size of the models that are being used. Now, why is that relevant? I don't think that image generation is necessarily going to transform the state, but in the same way that scale improves image generation, it improves the capabilities, the real-world capabilities of other types of models too. If you think back to GPT-2 that was released in 2019, that was a toy. If you look at GPT-4 today, that is a model that you can, and in fact I do use almost every day for a wide range of complex cognitive tasks. So the real question today is, where does this stop? You know, AI is already powerful today. The things that you've heard already about what AI can do today are important. But we must remember that today's AI is the least capable that AI will ever be. In fact, we should be ready for so much more. All the big AI companies today, Google, Microsoft, etc., are spending tens of billions of dollars a year on compute to keep this chart going for many more orders of magnitude. And the question is, what does that unlock? What will that do? Well, many people believe that in the next decade, it's possible that that will unlock human-like intelligence in these AI models. Are we taking this seriously? Lots of people will tell you at this point that, oh, AI is a bubble. It's all going to come crashing down. It's not ready for prime time. And you know what? They might be right. Anyone who has too much certainty about the future of AI, I think, is kidding themselves and probably kidding you. But the idea that there's no probability, no possibility of continued progress, to me is the craziest belief of all. And in fact, what we really need to do is to recognize that it's become very fashionable, very high status
Demis, thank you so much for coming along to our conference. And DeepMind's already been referenced several times. Actually, if you wouldn't mind, just tell us how did you start all this, and then I'll come on to.
Sure. Well, look, it's amazing to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and some fantastic talks this morning. We started DeepMind nearly 15 years ago now, which is sort of hard to believe. It was sort of before the AlexNet paper, and we saw some trends, both in computing trends, algorithms like deep learning and reinforcement learning, this new type of AI, which instead of being programmed with the solution, like the classic AI systems in the 80s and 90s, they learned for themselves. They were learning systems that learned directly from data, learned directly from first principles, from experience, and actually able to do impressive things. And we sort of bet on that, and also some neuroscience ideas about how the brain worked, things like memory systems, and we brought that all together back in 2009, 2010. And we felt that if we put that together with some of the best minds and engineers in the field, we could make very quick progress. The field was poised to make this enormous, as we've seen, exponential progress. So we sort of thought of DeepMind as like an Apollo program effort for AI. And it turned out we bet on those, the correct kind of trends. But even then, it's still quite surreal to see where we are today, even though that's what we predicted would happen if we were to make that kind of progress with this kind of AI system.
And it's a large operation today with a lot of people doing extraordinary bits of research and work, right?
Yes, it's huge now. It's several thousand people. I think it's probably one of the biggest research groups in the world in any field. And it combines cutting-edge research in many, many different areas, along with world-class engineering. And actually, modern AI is really big in sort of industrial operation, combining the best of both at scale, both hardware, software, and algorithmic ideas.
So, Demis, one of the things that, because I'm talking a lot, obviously, to policymakers, and I would say that whereas a few years ago they were kind of thinking, yeah, technology, yeah, that sounds interesting, right? Today they definitely think something's going on, but I still find when I say, this is really the big thing,
yeah,
they kind of, yeah, well, maybe. How big give us a sense of where you think this fits in the sort of history of innovation and economic advance and so on. Because frankly, it's better coming from someone, politicians become adept at talking about things they know nothing about, but it's, but you do know what you're talking about, so it's better coming from you.
Well, look, I've been working my whole career on AI for nearly 30 years now, and the reason was the sort of insight that I had back in the 90s was that if you look at modern society today, modern civilization around us, I often think about this when I take a transatlantic flight. It's incredible what the human mind, i.e. intelligence, has built modern civilization. And if you were to wind back 10,000 years, pre-agriculture, and tell a hunter-gatherer, that we were going to be flying on these massive, machines across the oceans, it would be unthinkable. And that was the power of intelligence that created that, human intelligence. So if we could replicate that and kind of make intelligence an abundant tool, if you like, it would be unbelievably transformative. There'd be almost nothing that you couldn't use that for if you built that in a general way. So to me, it's been obvious for many, many years that AI, if it was possible, and it seems that it is, this general kind of human-level AI we sometimes call artificial general intelligence, it would transform everything. So it will be at least as big as the Industrial Revolution, possibly bigger, more like the advent of electricity or even fire. I think it has the potential to be one of the biggest inventions humanity will ever make.
And when you come and think of it, you think of the practical applications of that. It stretches across everything.
It does. So I think building this in a general way, these systems, they're not sector specific, they're not domain specific. Whatever kind of data you put in, if there's structure in that data, these systems can potentially learn about them. And so I'm very excited about using AI for everyday productive tasks. So, amazing digital assistants, and reimagining the workflow. I think over the next 5-10 years, we're going to see incredible gains in productivity, both in the personal domain, but also in the work environment. But then the number one thing I'm most passionate about, and I've always wanted to build AI for, is to accelerate scientific discovery itself. And we've led the way in that, and probably the most famous example of that is our program AlphaFold, which solved the problem of 50-year kind of grand challenge of what's called protein folding, determining the structure, the 3D structure of a protein just from its amino acid sequence, its genetic sequence, which has huge implications in drug discovery and disease understanding. And I think that's just one example of what we're going to see in the next decade of many scientific breakthroughs in areas like energy, material science, mathematics, weather prediction, and climate, all sorts of areas, healthcare, that AI is going to be instrumental in.
I mean, I suppose anything that requires a lot of research, the effect of AI is just to accelerate all of that and take it to a higher level of intellectual capability, right?
Yes, exactly. So, you can think of it as, in the next sort of decade, as the ultimate tool to help human experts, whether they're medics or scientists, kind of take their skills and find new breakthroughs and find big insights into these enormous amounts of data that we're creating in most fields. I used to say when we started DeepMind that if you remember in the early 2000s, big data was a buzzword, right? And I used to say big data is actually the problem and AI is the answer. Because, before the advent of AI, there was all this data, both medical, industrial, and so on. But the question was, how can you possibly by hand find all the insights buried, potentially very valuable insights buried in that enormous, exponentially growing amount of data? And actually, AI systems is the answer to that. And I think whatever domain you think of, and I wanted to ask you about maybe how we apply this to NHS, and I think the opportunity in front of us to apply AI to public services is exactly that, which is enormous amounts of data, experts kind of overwhelmed with that. But if we could triage it with AI, that would allow the experts, whether they're doctors or nurses, to focus on what they do best. I don't know whether you're thinking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, to take it down specifically, if we just take healthcare, I mean, it should transform drug discovery and development, right? So you'll be able to do it you'll be able to find better cures and treatments and at a much accelerated pace. And then secondly, and this is where I think it's interesting when you look at something like the National Health Service, we should be able to take all the data that there is within the healthcare system and both use it in order to analyze what's happening in our healthcare system, so health policy, but secondly, to be able to create kind of digital assistants, right, where a doctor or a nurse is able to call on all the accumulated knowledge in our country and indeed elsewhere, right? And then thirdly, for the patient to have access to information, not just their own health information, but the potential for treatment, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's sort of enormous new opportunities as well of things like personalized medicine, where you potentially design a drug or a treatment that's specifically tailored to an individual's metabolism, reduce side effects. And then the other big thing, I think, is preventative healthcare, where you actually predict beforehand before someone gets ill, or maybe they're about to get ill, and perhaps you intervene beforehand, which is a much better outcome for the patient, and also potentially economically as well. So it's a kind of win on all, win-win really. So I think there's huge opportunities there. And I think government, maybe that's going back to sort of ChatGPT moment and other things. So those of us who've been in the industry for a couple of decades, we've been working at the coalface, improving these systems. And then I think one of the benefits of ChatGPT was it brought it to the public's attention because, of course, everyone uses language, and chatbots are very visceral in that sense that everyone can kind of get a feeling for what cutting-edge AI looks like, very hands-on. And I think the good part of that is that governments have sort of woken up to the potential of AI, and we saw that at the UK AI Summit, which I think was a huge success last year and is being built on. I think that's been very gratifying to see that governments educating themselves about what's coming. But I'm still not sure they fully understand the real, the unbelievable implications that are to come. We're only scratching the surface. I don't know how you feel.
I think for a lot of the leaders I talk to, ChatGPT is still a bit of a toy. Although I had an interesting experience. I was at some conference, and there were various presidents of countries speaking before me, and one of them got up and gave a speech about green energy in his country. And I thought afterwards, it's a bit boring, that speech. So I put into ChatGPT, give me a speech from the leader of our country. I won't say which country X on clean energy. 10 seconds later, I had a really good speech, actually. And I thought, it could make us redundant as well. But just one thing that's really interesting to me, digital assistants, right? Because sometimes people feel this is just quite a scary thing. I mean, it can replace the workforce, but you can think about it as a co-worker. I mean, if you're talking about a digital assistant, what sort of things would it be able to do?
And I agree with you, by the way. I think today's sort of chatbots are a little bit toy-like. I think there are very useful and valuable use cases, summarizing, long speeches and documents and things like that. It's very useful for. But it's still, but they're obviously impressive as those systems are. There's still a lot of flaws with those systems that we're trying to improve and correct. Things like hallucinations, but also give it new capabilities like planning and memory, which I think are really required for these assistants to be very useful in everyday life, so that all of us use it all the time. And I think we're moving towards that. So with our systems, Gemini, which is our versions of these large foundation models, we built Gemini to be multimodal from the beginning. So that means it doesn't just deal with language. It takes audio, video, image, coding, so all these different modalities. And that's critical because we as human beings, we exist in a very multimodal environment, right? It's not just language we use, although it's a critical component. It's the context that we're in. So I think for a system like this to be truly useful in your everyday life, it has to understand a little bit more about the context that you're in, the spatial context, the visual context as well. So that's what we're moving towards with our new systems, which we call Project Astra at the moment. It's a kind of prototype where you can imagine through your phone or glass or some other device, it not only can you converse with it, it actually understands the situation that you're in, understands something about, has some memory, so it can sort of refer to previous conversations you've had and actually build up an understanding about your preferences and what you do and what you find useful and recommend things to you, things like that. So I feel like in the next maybe 2-3 years, we're going to start seeing, we call those things like universal assistants, that will kind of come around with you on different devices and help in, seamlessly in everyday life, both work and in your personal life. And I think it's going to be amazing.
Which will drive big changes in productivity, right? Yeah. So, I mean, Gemini today and the level of investment that you guys have had to make in this, billions and billions of dollars, right? Yeah. So this is also probably a level of investment that government really can't do. So but give me a sense of, so these large language models, the two questions I wanted to ask you. The first is, how much better are they going to get, how faster? And the second is, if you were a government today, why wouldn't you want to have all of your data on in a cloud-based infrastructure where you could analyze it, all of it, right? And which you could feed into one of these large language models and actually adapt that model for your own country.
Yeah. Well, look, I think in terms of how fast these models are still improving, so, all the big companies, the big labs, leading labs are spending billions and billions of dollars on the compute infrastructure and the talent required to build these models and come up with new algorithms. That's going to continue. There's an interesting debate at the moment in the field about how long will that improvement curve just continue with existing methods, like Matt mentioned transformers. a revolutionary architecture that allowed, I think it was invented in 2017, that has allowed to these new systems to scale to the size they are. But it's my opinion that I think that we're still going to need a few more big innovations before we get all the way to human level intelligence, to artificial general intelligence. Certainly on things like planning and memory and tool use. So things like, which we sort of calling in the field, agentic behavior. So building towards systems that are capable of achieving goals. So current systems are kind of passive. You kind of input a question, it gives you an answer. They're kind of question answering systems, very smart question answering systems. But the next stage is actually bringing in some of these technologies that we've developed for games, like AlphaGo, where you're actually able to give it an objective, like win a game, and come up with a new strategy, come up with new plans, perhaps even invent something new. So that will be a whole another leap ahead again of the types of technologies that we have.
So you could, for example, if you were a country looking at policy on, I don't know, how you make the most effective grid system for energy efficiency, you would be able to use that in order to give you a plan that would accumulate all the wisdom that there is in the world on this particular point.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. I think we're going to see in the next era, although these models, these foundation models, take a lot of resources to make. There's the whole open source technologies coming out, so versions of these that are freely usable for anyone. Also, I think we're going to start seeing services where governments or companies can take one of the best existing models and then fine-tune it further on their own data. So going back to what you're saying about government putting all their data in some secure data center or database, and then taking one of the leading models and then further training it on that data. So in a way, it makes uniquely fine-tunes that model to that specific purpose and that specific data set. So that could be government, it could be NHS, it could be other data sources.
Right,
like
and the big investment you're making is in the actual foundational model. Right, adapting it is not such an expensive business.
No, exactly. So adapting it is today is currently a fraction of what it costs to build it. It may be that more resources, and we're starting to see this, go into the post-training stage, this kind of fine-tuning. There's a lot of gains there, I think, to be made. So that's where a lot of the research is going on, is what should you do further after the models have been pre-trained? What can you do on top?
There are 1,000 things I want to ask you, because it's so interesting and important. But I just want to ask you about what the UK should be doing.
Yeah.
But just before I come to that, just to explain for people one more time, I think what people sometimes find difficult is the difference between artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, and artificial general intelligence.
Yes, sure. So, generative AI is the type of AI that we're seeing at the moment that kind of creates language dialogue or things like images. So it's a particular type of AI. And then AI itself is the general term for the whole field. And artificial general intelligence, which actually one of my co-founders, Shane Legg, coined back in 2000, is this idea of getting to human-level general intelligence. And that's important because then you have a truly general system. Because our minds are general. We can turn it to almost any task, right? The human mind. It's incredible. And so that's the kind of generality we're after in our artificial systems.
And with an IQ of what?
Well, initially it will be, that's an interesting scientific debate at the moment. Of course, at the moment we're far from human-level intelligence across the board. But in certain areas, like games playing, we're better than the best people in the world. Now, the question is what will happen overall when we start generalizing this. But at the moment, we're still not even at cat intelligence yet as a general system. So we've got a long way to go. I think there's a lot of big breakthroughs that are still needed. I'm of the opinion that we're going to need both scaling the existing systems and some big new breakthroughs.
So, Dennis, in the time we've left, the UK, I mean, obviously, partly... thanks, frankly, to you and the efforts you made. But the UK's got a reasonable position in this field. But what should it be thinking about in terms of government, in terms of digital infrastructure, in terms of compute capacity and so on?
Well, I'm very passionate about the UK and the UK's position in this. I think we have many strengths here, national strengths here, our amazing universities producing incredible talent. It's one of the reasons we based ourselves here. We've got a long heritage in AI, through Alan Turing and even going further back in computing, Charles Babbage. So, there's no reason why the UK shouldn't be at the forefront of this. And then rolling forward today, I'm proud of the role that DeepMind partly played in creating the ecosystem that we see here, and people like Matt and Ian Hogarth and the amazing people working in this ecosystem and building this out. So I think we've got to embrace that. We've got to embrace the opportunities. I think, very much agree with everything you said earlier today about, with the new government coming in. It's an amazing time right now, and AI could be transformative for public services, the economy, but also our standing in the world. And I think actually the UK has a very important part to play on the global stage. And why I was encouraging, along with Matt and Ian and so on, the previous Prime Minister to take on board things like the summit. Because you've got the US, you've got China as the two superpowers, but I think AI is going to affect everyone in the world. It's going to affect every country, every nation, and I think it's important we have this international dialogue, international cooperation around both the opportunities and also some of the risks to do with AI. And I think the UK can be a kind of leading, in one of the leaders in the sort of the technology, but also a kind of middle way, if you like, along with perhaps other countries like EU countries, France, Canada, India, and so on. And I think if you look at the next tier after the US and China in terms of who's at the forefront of the research, the most publications or citations, those kinds of measures, then the UK, Canada, France, they're in the next tier. So I think it's important that those countries get together and have a voice. And I think I'm very pleased to see, the US Safety Institute being set up, for example, and working closely with the UK one. And I think that immediately makes things international. You can imagine that expanding to G7 or G20, and then EU as well following the lead there. And I think that's going to be very important as we start debating how we want to deploy increasingly more powerful AI. But maybe, I was going to ask you, with the new government coming in, what are you advising Labour to do now in this technology?
I'm advising them to talk to you. No, I mean, I think what I'm trying to do is just, because it's having been sort of brought up in the political world, it is hard to get your head round just the sheer scale of the change, and it just requires a different way of thinking. And, frankly, a lot of it's difficult. Some of these, I spend all the last summer, much to my family's irritation, just trying to read about everything, like from Alexander Bell and the telephone through to the first transistor, through to, and also the terms are so confusing. Right, cloud. Why do they call it cloud? Right. I actually spoke to one head of government. He said, no, cloud won't work here. He said, we're sunny all year round. So it's but what I'm really trying to say to them is, I know you've got 15,000 things, I know what it's like in government, you've got all the geopolitics, it's, you've got morning till night, you've got meetings and schedules and all the rest of it, but just reserve a bit of space for thinking about this, because it is a revolution and it will change everything. And what you've just given us today is just so fantastic, and we are absolutely proud to have you at the conference, and thank you for all you've done, not just for DeepMind, but for our country in this field. Thank you.
Thank you.
ChatGPT has come up with 2 words: coffee break. Please be back at 11:20, where we'll resume with this brilliant agenda. Thank you.
you.